We have a rather tight program. Can I ask you to please take your places so we can start? Thank you. We now come to the joint debate matters relating with the reports from the Monitoring Committee and the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. The first report is titled The Functioning of Democratic Institutions of Azerbaijan, presented by Mr. Stefan Shenak and Mr. Cesar Florin Preda, and the second by Mr. Destex, entitled Azerbaijani's Chairmanship of the Council of Europe. What follow-up on respect for human rights will be presented by Mrs. Olena Sotnik. We aim to finish this item by about 12 p.m. We will be interrupting the list of speakers at about 10:55. I remind members that the time limit on speeches is 3 minutes. The co-rapporteurs from the Monitoring Committee will have 13 minutes to present their report. Mrs. Olena Sotnik will then have 13 minutes to present the report by Mr. Destex. I will now call Mr. Shenak and Mr. Preda, the co-rapporteurs, to present the first report. Sir, you have 13 minutes in total, which you may divide between presentations of the report and reply to the debate. Sir.
Okay.
Please.
Chers collègues,
Dear colleagues, Mr. Shenak and I have worked intensively over the last 2 years to produce this report. During our visits to the country, we had intensive talks with the Azeri authorities, but also with civil society and extra-parliamentary opposition and the independent media to investigate the implementation of the recommendations of the Assembly since its last resolution in 2015. I'd like to thank everybody and all those we've spoken to for their availability and their readiness to talk to us. Of course, there have been some encouraging developments with the freeing of some political prisoners and the reform of penal policies through the presidential decree, but many people are still behind bars to this day. I'm convinced that there is an imperative to change the criminal code, the criminal policy, and that depends very much on the independence of the judiciary, which is a major issue in Azerbaijan. The principle of separation of powers is essential, and the judicial system has to be completely independent, impartial, and free from any kind of influence from the executive. Similarly, the function of parliamentary scrutiny also has to be strengthened, particularly with regard to the recent changes in the Constitution, which have restricted the ability to scrutinize. Mr. Shenak and I have spoken to the authorities about the situation of NGOs, and we are still concerned by the lack of readiness to change the legislation to bring it in line with the recommendations of the Venice Commission. Similarly, we are concerned about the repressive measures aimed at the independent media and the defenders of freedom of expression. It is vital to set up conditions which will allow NGOs and journalists to work freely without fear of repression. Another question which is crucial, I feel, is the implementation of the sentences handed down by the Court of Human Rights. All member states must conform to the Convention without any reservations, and we can't accept a selective approach to the judgments of the Strasbourg Court. So it is inadmissible, for example, that Ilham Ahmadov is still behind bars. I would ask you to support the report, and I hope that it will allow us to improve the state of democracy and human rights and the rule of law in Azerbaijan over the next few months and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Preda. You have just under 6 minutes remaining. I will now call Mrs. Sotnik, Chair, to present the second report. You have 13 minutes in total, which you may divide between the presentation of the report and the reply to the debate. You have the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear President, dear colleagues, as a new chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, I have been tasked to present this report of Mr. Destex in the Chamber. The report of Mr. Destex was approved by the Committee on the 5th of September, and 3 dissenting opinions were expressed to it. Its adoption took place just a day after The Guardian had published its revelations concerning the Azerbaijan laundromat, following numerous articles in the Belgian press about Mr. Destex's alleged involvement in this scandal. On 16 September, he resigned from being member of the Belgian delegation to the Assembly. Let me also recall that as a rapporteur, Mr. Destex took over from the Pedro Agramunt after he was elected as the President of the Assembly in January 2016. A motion for resolution of April 2014 was at the origin of this report. The supporters of this motion had expressed concern about the increase of politically motivated arrests and detentions in Azerbaijan, shortly before the country took up the rotating chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers. Regrettably, between May and November 2014, when Azerbaijan held the chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers, several human rights defenders who had cooperated with our organization were arrested and accused of serious tax offences. Also, most of them were released in 2016. In many cases, the charges against them have not been dropped and the criminal proceedings are still under way. This is in particular the case of the journalist Hadia Ismailova or the human rights activist Leyla Yunus. The report by Mr. Destex looked at the situation of human rights in Azerbaijan in 2017. Therefore, a few years after the motion for the resolution was lodged, it focused on the reported prosecution and detention of NGO leaders, human defenders and journalists on violation of the freedom of assembly, association, expression, religion and cases of torture carried out by law enforcement officers and the lack of effective investigation in this regard. It also analyzes the situation in judiciary, including the violation of the right to a fair trial and cases of lack of independence of impartiality of judges. As regards the issue of political prisoners or prisoners of conscience, the rapporteur did not wish to take a stance. He simply noted that their number ranged from just a few persons to 160, depending on the sources. For the preparation of this report, Mr. Destex undertook a visit to Baku last February, and subsequently he tried to reflect the views of the authorities and various NGOs. While in Baku, he visited a few prisoners of conscience in prison. All of this, with the exception of Ilgar Mamedov, all of them, with the exception of Ilgar Mamedov, were released last March. The Committee of Legal Affairs, when adopting on 5 September the draft resolution based on this report, expressed its concern about the reported prosecution and detention of NGO leaders, human rights defenders, political activists, journalists, bloggers and lawyers in Azerbaijan. It encouraged the authorities to review the cases of prisoners of conscience and released wrongfully imprisoned persons. The committee also expressed concern about the increasing number of violations of certain human rights, such as prohibition of tortures, the right to fair trial, freedom of expression, association and assembly. It has addressed a number of concrete recommendations to the authorities in order to stop these violations. In particular, it condemned instances of tortures carried out by law enforcement officers and called on the authorities to carry out effective investigations into such cases. It was also concerned about the lack of independence of the judiciary and arbitrary application of criminal law, and called for further reforms in this area. The committee also condemned the hostile climate and restrictive legislation for the work of media and NGOs, and urged the authorities to bring this legislation into line with standards of Council of Europe and to create an environment conducive for the activities of media and NGOs. Moreover, the Azerbaijani authorities should execute fully and quickly the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, including the Ilgar Mammadov judgment, by ensuring the immediate release of this applicant. In this respect, I would like to add that after the adoption of this report, the Committee of Ministers adopted a decision in which it condemned against the fact that Mr. Mammadov remains in prison and announced launching for the very first time the infringement procedure based on Article 46, paragraph 4 of the European Convention on Human Rights. In view of the recent allegation concerning the Azerbaijani laundromat, the committee also expressed about the impact of this money laundering scheme on the work of the Assembly and called the Azerbaijani authorities to inquire into these allegations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And immediately I give the floor to Madame Brasser from the ALDE Group. Madame.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your nomination or on your election. You're the right woman. First of all, I would like to congratulate you. Well, it's on? Well, yes. I wanted to speak to the President. In order to congratulate you on your nomination, you're the right, or election, you're the right woman on the right place. So thank you very much and good luck. To the report, congratulations to the rapporteurs. It was very difficult because of the circumstances. In 2014, after the chairmanship of the Committee of Ministers of Azerbaijan, we all hoped that there would be progress in Azerbaijan. What do we see? There is a regression on many points. And I listened carefully to Mr. Saidov last Monday when he spoke about the progress report. He said there was a regression in the Council of Europe, and he reversed the situation. And I quote one sentence of what Mr. Saidov said: "When we hear from officials of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and officials from the Council of Europe, for example, the Secretary General, very intolerant and aggressive statements concerning the member states, we start to ask why we are here." End of quote. But I want to recall our Azeri colleagues that there are so many shortcomings in Azerbaijan, and they are pointed out by these excellent reports. And there is a repression of civil society. Azerbaijan is on the 162nd place of the Press Freedom Index, on the 123rd rank on the Corruption Index. There is a lack of implementing the decisions of the Court of Human Rights. Concerning the allegations of corruption, and I don't want to repeat what colleague Schwabe said, we have to make it clear that corruption cannot be accepted, neither in one member state, neither here. So we have to blame, of course, the Azeris or those who tried to corrupt, but we have to blame also our members who accepted money from Azerbaijan, and we have now the evidence. There is also the Laundromat report, which says that 2.9 billion have been spent by Azerbaijan to take influence. There is a refusal of the Azerbaijan to publish the CPT report, which is, there is nothing to hide. So I ask the authorities of Azerbaijan, please authorize the publication of this report. There is a refusal to have an investigation on ill treatment and torture. So it is not the statement of our members which damage Azerbaijan. It is the lack of progress of the country. And please follow the recommendations of this excellent report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In the debate, I now will call the next speaker, who will be Mr. Omsic from EPP.
Thank you, Madam President, and congratulations on being elected as a president and on your excellent speech of what you intend doing in the short period you're in the chair. This assembly needs you, and we're proud of you. We're not so proud of Azerbaijan, There are two reports on the functioning, I would say the malfunctioning, of democratic institutions in Azerbaijan. I've never written a dissenting opinion, but this was the time. A dissenting opinion because this country is totally on the last place on the corruption index, on the press freedom index. It has political prisoners. When will Mr. Mammadov be released? And there was more than €2.5 billion to bribe politicians and to do private payments. The laundromat case. This report asks Azerbaijan to start an investigation immediately by itself. And I'm not going to ask a question to the rapporteurs this time, Madam President. I'm going to ask the questions to my Azeri colleagues who are later on this list. Could they tell me whether they think that we should start an investigation into this laundromat case and whether they will cooperate to get this investigation? Or are they going to blame the rest of Europe? Will they tell me whether they're going to see that it's their obligation under the treaty to make sure that Mr. Mammadov is being released? And will they ask their government, in written or oral questions, to publish the CPT reports? 5, 6 reports are secret. We don't know whether there is maltreatment, but you cannot say there's no maltreatment if you keep them secret. So please, colleagues from Azerbaijan, please take your chance. Tell us what you're doing for the sake of your own citizens. And if you then have a delegation, ask Mr. Suleimanov, who's not speaking today, but just ask him one question. What did you do with Mr. Volonte? And will you come clean for that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Mr. Strasser from Socialist Group.
Madam President, colleagues, I am extremely grateful to be given this opportunity to speak today. Following 12 years of membership of the Assembly, this will be my last speech, and I have to say that it is extremely moving that I come to speak on a subject on which I worked very hard and that we have debated together, and I am extremely grateful that you've once again taken up this subject, and a very clear message is being sent out against the backdrop of the many conversations and debates that we have had in recent weeks, months and years. And colleagues, all of us would very much like to have solutions to remedy the many failures and shortcomings that we have shone a light on, and it would be nice to think that we were on the right track. But I have to say that following on from my rapporteurship, I am sorry to say that I do not think that sufficient progress has been made. Now, people creating the impression that we are just focusing on one country, but, you know, we are not putting any single country in the dock. Rather, all countries have to be taken to task, and we have to scrutinize whether they are abiding by human rights and applying judgments of the ECHR, and that applies to Turkey and Armenia, to Germany, and to all countries. And certainly we have to have discussions, however painful they might be, in my own country, and we accept the judgments of the European Court and we execute the judgments. Now, we've talked on many occasions about that, as indeed of the fate of Mr. Mammadov, and it's simply not on that a member state of the Council of Europe continues to flout the judgments of the European Court, and we know that there are at least 100 judgments that have not been implemented, and that is why I think we are right to demand explanations. Now, let me make one personal comment. It's very important to me. 4 years ago, a report was debated here. Now, I do not want to comment on the results, but I do want to quote one of our colleagues from Azerbaijan. He said that the Council of Europe is not Mr. Strasser's, this is my Council of Europe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if that is the mentality of people here in this chamber, then really, because the Council of Europe doesn't belong to any of us, rather we are here to see to it that the Convention is respected elected, and we are accountable only to the voters whose interests we represent, and they have placed great hope in this wonderful institution. And we have to do everything in our power in the face of these corruption allegations to make sure that this, which is after all a highlight of the post-war era, which is a bulwark for democracy, the rule of law and human rights. And that is why I wish you every success in the future, and I hope we will be successful in implementing human rights throughout the world in the future. Thank you very much.
I immediately call Mr. Seydov from the EC Group to take the floor.
First of all, Madam President, let me also congratulate you with this very important position and wish you all success during your period of time. Ladies and gentlemen, dear rapporteurs, despite of the fact that this report is really very critical and in some cases we are not agree with some statements, the general attitudes which we can see from this report is in a sense of dialogue. Azerbaijan is always in favor of dialogue and constructive communication with all institutions, including Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly. We never rejected objective, constructive criticism. But unfortunately, what can we do? Despite of all achievements which Azerbaijan has done during 16 years of our membership in this organization, we are under pressure, pressure and again pressure. And as an answer to the questions from Mr. Omczyk, Mr. Omczyk, that's enough just to present yourself as an objective defender of democracy. We know who is behind you. We know about your supporters from Armenia. Enough. Everybody knows your objective in common position. And enough to ask us why Azerbaijan is not ready to do something. My question is a little bit different. Why, for example, Council of Europe is not attended and investigated situation in European Court of Human Rights where 10,000 applications have been waiting their implications? Why Mr. Secretary General of the Council of Europe, from my point of view, his position called Secretary General, but he's also accepted the first position, General, but he's forgot that he is Secretary. He should do his best to establish the dialogue between countries. And he's doing his best to do very, very, for him, acceptable communications with, for example, Russian Federation. And he is very tough with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has done a lot. Within this period of time, I think, we especially, together with Monitoring Committee, despite of all criticism, change a lot within our country. But we have been waiting respect, and we have been waiting mutually understanding. In this case, we will be able to continue our communication.
Thank you. The next speaker on the list is Mr. Herkel from the EPP Group.
Thank you, Madam President. Congratulations, honorable rapporteurs, dear colleagues. I was rapporteur on Azerbaijan during 6 years from 2004 until 2010, and so after chair of the Monitoring Committee. I know the story of Azerbaijan in this House. Of course, during those years, I never witnessed bribery in very strict sense. But I always felt something is wrong. Something is wrong in the opinions some colleagues are expressing. Something is wrong how the so-called friends of Azerbaijan are gathering for the election observation missions. Only later it was called caviar diplomacy, and now we have some evidences about how money was used to bribe the politicians. The international network of political corruption is much wider than it is now evidenced, and it was orchestrated from the Baku. And therefore I started to read the reports, questioning whether there are still some signs of unlogical attempts to calm down the criticism. I found some of them. In the Legal Affairs report, in the explanatory memorandum, for example, in paragraph 77, there is call to deal the subject without criticizing authorities harshly and publicly. I still want to have my speech here. And in the last paragraph, there is said that the topic must be kept only for the monitoring committee. But what about political prisoners? And in the second report, I found the expression so-called political prisoners. Their colleagues, Ilgar Mammadov, Mehman Husseinov, many others, they are political prisoners. Therefore, please to be exact. And for my final remark, I would use half a minute to remember the case of Elmar Husseinov, prominent independent journalist who was murdered in 2005. I was a young rapporteur. It was shocking. And only after 12 years, now we got from the European Court of Human Rights the consideration about inadequacy of the investigation in Azerbaijan. It is also, dear colleagues, inadequacy of addressing the problems we are raising here. Thank you.
Thank you. And now immediately call